Hey everyone. Still just laying some groundwork in the beginning of week 2 here, getting a sense of how we do ethics. And we're going to talk in class this week about James Rachel's and the argument that morality is not relative. But I also wanted to just sort of do this quick video to get us prepared for class, thinking a little bit about the components of making ethical judgments, and then sort of moving actually from the idea of making judgments to thinking in terms of questions. So last week I introduced the idea of prescriptive and descriptive claims. As a quick reminder, prescriptive claims are claims about values, and I've got the example about the death penalty there. It's always wrong to execute an innocent person. Notice, right, the claim always wrong is something that can't really be proved one way or the other, and that's one way to think about it being prescriptive. I want to be a little bit careful about what I just said. It can't always be proved. They can't even in theory be proved. And the reason I say that is some descriptive claims might be very hard to prove one way or the other, but at least in theory they could be proved, right? So descriptive claims, again, are claims about facts. Innocent people are sometimes executed by the state. Sometimes we can find that out. Sometimes that's harder. And then just a brief note here, right, that normally when we're talking about arriving at some sort of ethical judgment, we often are getting there with a combination of prescriptive and descriptive claims, right? So if I say it is always wrong to execute an innocent person, which is prescriptive, and innocent people are sometimes executed in our death penalty system, that sort of leads to the conclusion that capital punishment is morally unjust. And capital punishment is morally unjust is itself a prescriptive claim, but here, right, that's the conclusion that came from our earlier premises. Now, prescriptive and descriptive can be a little tougher than it might seem at first, and I've got a short quiz. It's basically a matching quiz on prescriptive, descriptive, just to help you get a feel for it, because sometimes claims that look like they're one kind of claim are really the other. And I'm not overly concerned about, like, if you finish the semester and you struggle with prescriptive, descriptive, it's not the end of the world. It's just a way of helping us understand the complexity of moral thinking. So, for instance, take the question, how many deaths were prevented by the death penalty? Now, we can't really know the answer to that question. It's really hard. There's too many variables at play. But that doesn't mean it's not descriptive. So that's the first complicated part. The second complicated part is that, like I said, sometimes prescriptive looks like descriptive and vice versa. So take the claim a fetus is a person. Because it used the word is, it seems descriptive, but person is a moral concept, right? It's a moral status. That's different than saying something is of the species Homo sapien. And so it's a prescriptive claim. Now that's different than a claim a fetus can feel pain at 8 weeks, right? We could actually look into whether or not that's true, of course, on average. Now the thing that I want you to start to think about for week 2 is that we're going to start to move into a mode of thinking about questions more than anything else. And I've got a set of case studies that we're going to start to look at. So another item in course materials is this packet of case studies. So look those over for class Wednesday. We'll start talking about a few, and then we're going to have an assignment based on them coming up pretty soon. So these case studies, one way to get good at thinking about case studies is to really think in terms of what questions get generated. And I think that helps us see ethical issues as more complex. And I actually think that when we see things as more complex, it makes us less dogmatic and more compassionate, because we're able to see that, something we think is super obvious, maybe not as obvious as we originally thought, and therefore it makes it a little easier for us to show sympathy with someone with whom we might disagree. So if you see a claim in ethics, if you want to try to move backwards to finding the question, it's pretty simple. You just sort of reverse engineer it, right? So if you hear someone say a fetus is a person or is not a person, we're really beginning to think of the question, is a fetus a person? And notice what happens when we do that. When I raise the question, is a fetus a person? Instantly, that becomes a much more complex discussion, because we get led to other questions. Well, what makes something a person? Well, or is something a person if it can feel pain? Well, not necessarily, because lots of animals and maybe even some non-animals, even plants, could have an experience of pain. Is a person something that has the capacity or is able to exercise rationality? Well, that's tricky, right? Because a toddler or baby maybe can't do that. Maybe somebody who's severely cognitively impaired can't do that. So immediately we start to get a complex set of questions simply by turning the statement into a question. So I want you to think on your own. We can talk about this in class about how we would turn these claims into questions. We have obligations to future generations. Animals feel pain. Affirmative action is justified because it attempts to redress historical injustices. You could see that it's actually pretty easy to do that, but it's still something that'll get us talking. So that's descriptive. This is my bad, actually. Some of these examples here aren't about descriptive claims, so I didn't mean to confuse you. Animals feel pain. That's a descriptive claim. We have obligations to future generations, and affirmative action is justified or not. And that leads me to this point about prescriptive questions. Really, prescriptive questions can come in a couple of there's sort of two big different types. You have conceptual questions and questions concerning moral principles. So questions concerning moral principles include things like, is it always wrong to lie? Are there certain traits we should all aspire to have? How do we weigh the various harms in a particular issue, etc. Conceptual questions are often things like when we're trying to define something, right? So when we talk about issues of, let's say, euthanasia, one thing we might not think about is, what is the purpose of medicine? So if you don't think about that question and you assume the purpose of medicine is obviously to extend life, then you arrive at a clear answer about euthanasia, which is that it's always wrong. But if you thought about that question a little bit and thought, well, there are other definitions of the purpose of medicine, like the purpose of medicine is to alleviate suffering. Well, then euthanasia seems to be more acceptable if we think about it that way. So again, these conceptual questions can help us see the complexity of moral issues a little bit. All right, so again, your quiz is real simple. It's only on a little part of this. I'm still trying to get the hang of this other video service, Panopto, so I can embed the questions. But for this week, I just want you to practice the prescriptive, descriptive, and we'll get further into these issues in class. And as part of our sort of unit, what is ethics, the next things we're going to talk about are sort of, why be moral and what gets in our way of being moral. All right, look forward to it.